All right, here's what we're going to try to do. And we'll break it up into 3 sections. We'll give you a little bit the idea of social capital, what we meant by it. I mean, look, it's not rocket science, right? People have talked about it before. But just think about, there's different kinds of capital at play. We're going to end up talking about, there's the money part. There's the actual people who show up. And then there's the way those people interact. So for those, I'm 52, right? So I was getting my PhD in the late 90s. And then there was a lot was called social exchange, right? But it's drawing from that era and the idea of what's the goodwill and how do you build up that goodwill amongst people, all right? So we'll talk about that. We very quickly, when we knew we were coming here and we're really excited about this event, turned on some research and went out and where's Taylor at? I don't know, like 5,000 people, something like that. We got a large number of people. The people in the back who are actually the brains of the operation and did it. We have really cool data. And we think we have some pretty interesting findings that are both interesting but also a little worrying. So I'm going to give you like what we mean by it, how it's set up. Brooke's going to run you through some of the findings, and at the end we'll say, well, here's some things we think you can do about it. It does conveniently dovetail, and this was not on purpose. We didn't know what the data was going to say, with the research we've been running for a while on great attrition, great attraction. And obviously one of the early things there was stop talking about the money. Right? Yes, that just gets you in. It's like going to the casino, and you see like there's the $25 table, the $50 table, and the $100 table. You pay just to sit down. Everything else you do when you're there is actually the playing part, and a comp is a bit like that. You just got to pay to sit down. Everything what we're talking about is assuming you've figured out that you got to pay to sit down. And then the rest of it is how you treat those people. Okay, first one, great attrition or grand resignation or the great exodus or whatever. The headline is people are leaving and they continue to leave, right? And we should not be surprised by it. It is continuing. It's not going to stop. And in fact, we were talking about this morning. This is probably where the killing me softly came from. In the US, if you get married, if both of you are getting married for the first time, you have about a 50-50 chance of it working. If one of you has been married before, it's about a third. If one of you had been married twice before, it's like less than a quarter, probably more like in the high teens, 20%. Now, how does that relate to this? There's an emotional stigma attached with leaving. The first time you do it, it's difficult. The second time you do it, it's easier. The third time, you've been doing it all along. And there's something here about we're now seeing rebound employees come in. And remember the days when you were a probationary employee? Well, there's still probation, except you were on probation. And the employees are deciding whether or not they want to stay with you. So just keep that in the backdrop. The power balance has, in fact, shifted rather dramatically. And it's not just about whether or not the employees are going to be collectively bargained for or unionized. It's just each of them individually realizes they have real choice and they're getting much clearer on their demands. So that's the backdrop here. You have to work for this. It's not going to happen on its own. Second, hybrid, most definitely here to stay. In what form, I think, is a little variable. I think the polls are both getting it wrong. The mandate of thou shalt come back is absurd. And it's as if we've ignored the previous 2 years. That's most definitely not going to happen, including the misfortunate label of return to work. As you could say, well, what the hell did you think we've been doing? Right? Particularly the people who are like trying to do a Zoom while prepping food for the kids while helping the other kid with algebra, right? And for there's a lot of women and moms here. Thank you. Because the pile-on of your roles over the last 2 years has been nothing short of absurd. And we see it now with a number of women in particular leaving the workforce and saying, I'll see you when it gets back to not being crazy, which may be for a long time. Employee experience, broad bucket, right? But we are seeing increasingly people being able to articulate more and more what they need and want. And the more articulate they are, it's actually the better for you. So that's a bit of a flip side. The good news is they're articulating what they want. The bad news is many, many, many employers have no idea how to deliver it or how to make sense of a broad workforce who may have things that appear to be in conflict or different. Okay? Can we go to the next one? So what can you do? Well, there is something to hold on to. For many people, work is still where they spend the largest amount of their waking hours. It's still where a significant portion of their social relationships come from. Most people do want to interact with people they like. Most people want to be reminded, right, that they like the people they work with. I mean, I'm looking at John Parsons there, my newly made senior partner at McKinsey, which is just wonderful. And we've worked together for a long time, and I hadn't seen John in a long time, live. In fact, I was out here and talking to Emily Field, and our wonderful lady in the back who was corralling us to get mic'd up said, yeah, we need you now. I'm like, I've been working with her nonstop for 2 years, and I think I've seen her once. That idea, the idea of the tie that binds, the emotional connection we have with colleagues, it's still there, right? There's a way to capitalize on that, right? But it's not from a mandate. It is likely some form of momentum, but remember that and take advantage of it. Okay, multiple kinds of capital. Financial capital, cash, capital, credit, what you need to be able to fund the idea, right? If you think about it, how many of you have put in some kind of a plan or a budget this year? That plan or budget probably came with a check, right? Okay, that's the bottom part. Is anyone worried about where financial capital is coming from right now? No. No shortage of it. When was the last time anyone worked a weighted average cost of capital? No one does. Because money's cheap. Credit is still cheap. And there's so much private money on the sidelines waiting to jump on something. Just track what PE is paying on a multiple for new companies. It's gotten crazy. So no problem getting money for a good idea. But then the upper left, you have this issue of, and a good board will often say, do we have any chance in hell of doing this? And that's like, oh, wait, well, do we? Do we have the skills we need? So the bulk of the work we've been doing on future work, and on great attrition, great attraction, and a lot of it on sourcing and being really novel on sourcing where you can go to expand the pool, which is wonderful to DE&I, by the way. Solving for the end number isn't nearly as good as doing a much better job upstream, right? And you can run equity all the way through by just being way more thoughtful about who's in the pool. So you can get at that. Okay, but now you got them. Now what? Well, now the way they interact is what actually really matters, and it's the stickiness. In the past, and I will date me now, not Brooke, who's significantly younger, but in my lifetime, too many employers on a resume would have been viewed as a negative. It's, oh, you're a mercenary, you're jumping around. A gap in your resume was a death sentence. You have to be able to explain what the hell is going on there. No one cares about that now. It is entirely, does it work for me? Which means you're back to this network of people inside the company, outside the company, your brand. God help you if you find a really, really good employee who has a skill you need and you do really poorly with them, because anyone who looks like them or has the skills that they have, you will not get them. Because it radiates in the community, because it's all wired in. So part of our research here was, well, how can we understand this network? Can we understand more about it? Can we go to the next one? Okay, now we turn to the academics who use some unnecessarily complicated words, but broadly we'll follow along here. The first one, and I'm going to reorder this just in a second because it doesn't make sense to me this way. In the middle, motivation. Do they want to do it? Are they actually motivated and want to do it? There are some people who motivation for the day is getting off the couch. That's true, like seriously. The amount of depression that's kicked in during COVID, it is actually a challenge to put like your big kid clothes on. Okay, so there's the motivation. They got to want to do it, both to start them and maintain them. Maintenance, how many of you, when people have left the place and you're like, yeah, I really can't wait to get together for dinner. Friendships require effort and energy, and maintaining them requires even more of it when you don't see them every day. So that's a real challenge. Then we have access. Let's say you want to do it. Do people feel like they can know how to plug in? Who are the conveners of the network? Who are the stage gates? Who can get you entree into and meet all these other people? Think about the helpful people in your life who said, you know what, I want you to come to drinks with me here. I want you to come to dinner. I'm going to introduce you to some people. What are they doing? They're giving you access to a different world. Good sponsorship and good mentorship in many cases is, come on, I'm going to introduce you, and or then they vouch for you to get you in, and then it's on to you, but that's getting access. Last one, ability. It's not just do you know how to talk, although that helps. Right? A lot of it is actually, can you make the time? Can you make the resources? Can you figure out how to juggle work, life, and all your different roles? And again, I'll go back to something I was saying before. No, for everyone, but particularly for women in the Western world, but here in the US, the layering of roles, mom, maybe a caregiver to an elder parent, teacher, partner, and oh yeah, by the way, employee, where the employer decided to fill in every moment that you weren't in a car on drive time is now a Zoom time. That compression of roles has made it incredibly difficult for people to say, I don't know how I'm going to do all this, but what has a lot of people do is raise their hand saying, I'm out. I'm done trying to do all this. So we have to keep this in mind, the three of them, okay? So even if they want to do it and they know where it is, they may not actually figure out, I don't know how the hell I'm going to pull this off. Next one, please. Okay, so does it matter at all? Does anyone think it doesn't? I can blow through this, but we'll give you the headlines. People who are doing this right, you have less turnover, your company makes more money. There is a wonderful saying from all of our organizational health work, if you run the place better, you make more money. Like 20 years on, that still holds. That shouldn't seem strange to anyone, but in the early days, we used to have people say, oh, no, it's if you make money, people think it's run better. It's the exact opposite. Run it better, people want to join you, they work harder, they give you discretionary effort. It's old school exchange. I invest in, you invest in me, we all do better. Leaders and teams. Have you ever found yourself when somebody needed help and you just for a second said, crass language alert, is this person an a-hole? Do I want to help them or not? Are they out for them or are they out for us? Think about the number of times you've gotten emails or calls and it seems so usury in its nature that you decide, well, do I want to help them? Do I want to plug in? At its core, that's a fabric of the relationships. Do I want to help them or not? Am I solving for me or am I solving for we? The we would be obvious, of course you'd help them. But when the nature of the social exchange isn't there, it breaks down. Social capital. Do I have goodwill in the bank? Like anything else, think about this as a bank account. There are going to be times we're going to do lots of stuff to invest in. And you're going to do it knowing that one day you're going to draw it down. I need you on the weekend. I'm sorry. I get it, and it's a huge ask. But I'm going to be there with you, but we got to do it. Obviously, you can't do that every weekend, never do deposits, but there is the give and the get. That's the essence of it. Individuals. We, McKinsey, and I realize I'm dropping lots of our little research, but we have a thing coming out from McKinsey Global Institute and the practice we're part of on the value of human capital. And one of the biggest things is, there's, of course, what kind of degree do you have? What school did you go to? Surgeons make more than people parking cars. Interestingly enough, though, there's this idea of mobility within and between firms. And we're seeing that you can close up to as much as half of that gap just by mobility. How do you have mobility between firms and within firms? Access to this network, access to this social capital. You're aware of openings before they get posted, right? People see what you can do and they're like, hey, we're going to give you a shot. Boy, does that really compress the distance when you get at it. Can we go to the next one? Okay, now I think we're coming to you now, right?
Yeah, we're going to see some data.
Okay, that was okay. Now, Brooke's actually, that's me. I'm going to take a breath, and you're going to drop us through what we're seeing.
All right, we're going to look at some data. So as Bill said at the start, this is fresh out of the oven data. We surveyed upward of 5,000 individuals, all US-based, and this is cross-sector, cross-industry, and those individuals represent almost 2,000 companies. And so the data you're about to see explores some of the elements of social capital. They've gone down a lot. So employees feel less connected than ever before. If you just look at these numbers, 14% of employees report that their network has grown. That's a really small number. Not even a quarter feel connected with people in their network. And this is in the context of the great attrition, where we know that a connection and purpose, and connection especially with one's manager in an organization, is precisely actually what gets an employee to stay at their organization. And then just 17% of employees have more contact with people external to their company network, also a very important form of social capital. And let's keep going. This is, I have to say, when I saw this data, I wasn't entirely surprised, but it's not a great picture when you look at men versus women. And Bill talked about some of the extra duty that some women carried during the pandemic, and certainly that had a potential impact here in terms of being able to grow the network, feel more connected, and have more contact. And I want to show you another cut at the data, which is by level. Look at the senior leaders compared to the front line and that delta there. This is, frontline workers feeling connected. These were the workers that went back, right? They never actually left the office and had the luxury of, showing up in their Lululemon shorts on Zoom. These are the frontline workers, and they are not feeling connected, and their networks have, by and large, not grown at all. And I want to show you another picture of the data here, which looks at employees and how they're engaging contacts within their company and outside of their company. And I want to show that side by side, actually, with this next cut of the data. When you look at what's happening in terms of connections within a company, you can see that it's become transactional. So even within a company, the majority of connections are work-related, which isn't a bad thing. But if you think about employees and how tightly their identity is often tied to their work and even their employer. It's in some ways a little bit sad that so many of the connections now are primarily based on work-related information and knowledge. Employees are going outside of their organizations to find that social connection, which again, in connection with the great attrition research, I think there, is something happening here, right? If I can't get that connection inside, I don't have as much of an issue leaving that organization and moving on because I'm getting that connection elsewhere.
No breaks either. If you think about the nature of code switching, like on the way to work, whether you were in public transportation in the car, there was a little bit of you were shedding the role you were just in. Maybe if you had a particularly difficult conversation, on the way out, like I don't mind admitting I took the compost can and put it in the back of the truck and then left it in the truck and didn't empty it yesterday. So I did get a wonderful text this morning reminding me that the car smelled, in fact, like decaying vegetables. Anyway, that's a role I play, and then I have to code switch into coming to this. For many of us, we do that. What's interesting here is that then the code switching is shifting towards those new set of relationships. You do invest in those, and you want to go at it. And now, proximity has it where you're not going into town to go to drinks. Heck, for 18 months of this, we couldn't even go out to drinks or go out and get a bite, right? We were kind of holed up. And so I think this idea of calling it transactional is worrying. If the only interactions you have is just running water through the pipes, when do any of the relationships get nourished and renewed, right? So I think this is absolutely something to think about in terms of when do you get to give back into this sustenance to these relationships, or it becomes that.
And let's look at motivation next. So got lots of data here, lots more where this came from too. Okay, so this is now looking at employees reporting expanding their efforts to build their network. So I'm motivated, I'm going to get in touch with old acquaintances, I'm going to build new professional ties, I'm going to strengthen existing ones. And again, really low numbers, right? A third to a quarter are saying they're doing this. And one of the really interesting things here is there are clear differences when you look at who's doing that. So you see men much more likely to invest energy in building their networks, and then senior leaders as well. So huge disparities, again, when you look at the demographic data on this. And then I want to show you this too. When you think about, well, why, right? What's the motivation and what's holding women back? Well, women are also reporting much less support when it comes to connection opportunities, to sponsorship, to mentorship. And let me just define sponsorship. We had a great conversation at dinner last night about the concept of sponsorship. Sponsorship is not mentorship. Sponsorship is creating an opportunity or creating a series of opportunities for someone else, versus a mentor or mentorship is where you go to someone for advice, career advice, personal advice. So there's a difference. And for both of these dimensions, we're seeing that women reporting lower levels of sponsorship, lower levels of mentorship, and then they just don't have as many opportunities to make those connections. And I'm going to show you this too, because we looked at this by level. And again, look at senior leaders versus frontline. Now, some of this is accumulated experience, for sure. But there are many highly tenured frontline employees as well. And they also report much lower levels of mentorship, sponsorship, and connection opportunities. All right, we're going to go into abilities because this is where kind of the story gets, I would say, kind of interesting. We thought that abilities would similarly be low, right? So I also don't have the know-how, I don't have the time, I don't think that this is part of my job. And interestingly, that is not what the data say at all. They say about half of the sample we have in our survey actually believe that they do have the abilities to go and drive and build their social capital. So what's happening? And if you look...
Can you stick with that one just for a second? Yeah. It's a fun audience participation moment. Who would have been raised during a period of time when you said, you don't have to tell people how good you are, they'll notice? It is. I think there is a generational component, but maybe not, about the idea of humility and about that, well, surely they'll know what I want to do next. They'll know what's important to me. And I do think we've grown some folks, particularly those in sort of a Judeo-Christian, work ethic, kind of head down and beaver away. I'm not sure that we've wired everyone to do this, or maybe it feels even a little uncomfortable talking about this as what I need. Now, of course, we could spend a whole nother session on the nature of our relationships, on the very thing of not being very good at saying what you need until you're so pissed off that you're not getting it that, then it's like not a productive conversation. I wonder if there's not something similar here, because it is, again, the nature of a relationship. Well, why doesn't the boss or the senior person know exactly what I want?
Yeah.
So there is no doubt whether it's I shouldn't be spending time on it or I'm not exactly sure how to do it. We probably need to recast that if people are actually going to have a chance of getting out of it what they need.
Yeah, and look at what happens too. This, it was funny when we saw this data. We said, "Can you make sure those numbers are correct? Is it not the inverse?" And no, sure enough, these are in fact the numbers. And so the way we were thinking about it was, look, even with women with dependents, willing to multitask, right? I think this is part of my job. I'm willing to go for it. I even feel like I kind of know how, but not necessarily, given what we saw in access and in motivation, able to do it, right, as well, in terms of having those connections. And here it is with the frontline. So this, is a little bit of a different story. So frontline employees reporting lower abilities, right, not necessarily as likely to see as having time, the know-how to consider it part of the job. And I think the slide is still in here. So this is just frontline employees, and you see that, again, with parents who are also frontline employees, the number is higher. So there's some interaction effect here with, the responsibility of parenting that is showing us that the ability level is higher, and maybe some of that is just needing to know how to do that, right, when you have children or other dependents that are counting on you. But some interesting interaction.
There's nothing like the middle of the night wake up to clarify the mind.
Yes.
I mean, when we were doing the work on individual purpose, maybe like 18 months ago, one of the things that was really interesting was the younger, and I mean that quite specifically, chronologically younger the employee was, the more passionate they felt like, I don't know exactly what my purpose is, I just know it needs to make a difference. I'm going to spend my time on stuff, but they had a very, very hard time articulating what that would look like. The minute the person had another mouth to feed, someone else responsible for, a child, a partner, whatever, but now they're responsible for someone, which meant every hour at work was an hour not spent with that person. They got very clear about they could even ratchet back that they didn't necessarily need to solve all of world hunger, but they'd like to fix it in this particular town or this area. And so the clarity around what that was got much higher. And I do think, because we really did, we sent to Taylor and NLP, can you check the data, because we don't believe it. But it's consistent with this, that the idea of having dependence triggers, I think, necessity. There's still a thing on whether or not the conditions are there, whether or not people are reaching out and doing it. But I think there's more of a felt need, which then shouldn't surprise that if the felt need's there, what are you going to have? You're going to have dissatisfaction, right, if people aren't helping you do it. So segmentation often comes in a variety of forms in the workforce. For sure, the idea of, is there real draw on people's time for these other relationships, right? And hey, think about it, 2 years at home, whereas in the past, you'd go to work, and it's almost like the kids went off to school, your partner went off and did what they did, you kind of forgot about it, right? You didn't forget about it, but it was in the back of your mind. When you're trying to do this all with the kids right in front of you, or the parent you have to take care of or whatever, it becomes so crystal clear that every erg of energy spent on work is not being spent on them. And so increasingly this better be worth it, including the nourishment of the relationships better be good enough. Otherwise, why would you do it? You can't constantly be going in to the battle that is life depleted because you're dealing with a pack of a-holes at work. And I think a lot of people are simply looking like, you're not giving me anything. So the more we spent time on it, it was interesting just to see it. But it was nice to see that we had that split with dependents.
I want to get into, before we run out of time, what happens today when we get social capital right? So one of the things we did in the survey was we didn't just ask about patterns in terms of people's, their building of their social capital or lack thereof. We also asked some performance-related questions. And so first, one of the things that we found was that social capital is apparently playing an interesting role when it comes to the great attrition, the great attraction. So we found that 41% of employees who found a new job in the last 2 years actually went to a company where they had contact. Maybe not surprising, but is anyone actioning that kind of connection from a sourcing standpoint, right? From a talent acquisition standpoint? We're all familiar with referral programs, but are we actually doing, right, the intentional strategy to try to harness some of these connections? And look at what happens when that employee shows up and they join an organization with at least one professional contact, right? They feel higher levels of sponsorship, of connectedness, of mentorship. The proverbial kind of Gallup question of, do you have a best friend at work, still matters. So social capital improves employee experience. We also find that employees that frequently, this is collaboration with contacts outside of their organization, are more likely to, within their own organization, report higher levels of sponsorship, a sense of belonging. We talked about that at the start of the day, and feeling engaged. So social capital is expansive in that way, right? You're building your network overall, and you can still feel more locally connected within your org. And then finally, we talked a lot about women in this presentation. If you look at this correlation between growth of network and feeling connected, there is a positive correlation with having strong mentorship, right, in the organization. So how can you use that as a mechanism to close some of the gaps that we observed earlier in the presentation? All right, so I think we're going to go right into the conclusion.
Okay, this one here. So what can you do about it? I mean, obviously, we have this, it wouldn't be a McKinsey chart without an obscene amount of blue and different shades of it. It's just what kind of place do you want to be? Right? And that's this idea of an aspiration. There is something about how you want to run the place that would shape this, right? Is it a place really fixated on general managers, in which case the networks, you'd expect almost like a federation of networks and exchange. And then, of course, the community of those leaders would really matter. I mean, I served a large oil company for a long time that had the international cadre. Prior to Americans becoming exorbitantly expensive to send abroad on expat packages, that small group of leaders was the fabric. PepsiCo was this way for a long time, Royal Dutch Shell, Unilever, GE in its heyday, the general managers, that cadre, even General Motors and the Treasurer program, all this thing of a community, a network. So know what kind of place you're going to be. Is it a frontline place, grinding it out, in which case probably plant work would matter or shift work? But what kind of networks are you going to inculcate? Then the second one, just assessing it, is what do you actually have? Here's the most important thing for you to take away. You do, in fact, have a network. It used to be called the water cooler. It most certainly exists. You're either ignorant of it or you know it. But it's occurring. And every day they're making sense of what you're doing or not doing, and they're talking to people about it. You just have to decide how high functioning it is and who's being hived out. A ton of inclusion work, if you think about it, we were talking about this earlier when you put people in, is helping them plug in. How many high-priced hires have you gone out and gotten, paid the 35% multiple on, and they couldn't plug in anywhere, and no one cared about what ideas they came up with? Right? That is all the network working or not working. It's like classic organ donor organ rejection. Oh, you with your fancy ideas, yeah, sorry, that's not how we do it around here. That is also a negative downside of the network. And then on architecting, people don't arrive on day one with anything other than excitement and anxiety. They've made a big life choice. They desire to be there. They also probably need a little help plugging in. Do they have a friend? Do they know somebody from LinkedIn? Do they know whatever it is, find it and inculcate it. But don't let them out on their own. To throw them in at the deep end and see who lives, probably not a great way to get something out of the investment you just made.
I think we're good.
Are we done?
Yes, we're good.
Should we recap? Go.
So by the way, I think I will recap. Access, not a great picture, right? Motivation, similarly. Abilities, I think that's where it got interesting in terms of people saying they do have the know-how, they want to spend the time. I think and then of course the demographic differences, right? So we have much more when it comes to actioning this. I do think data is our friend here. We mentioned the influencer, right? We have analytics to understand how to do this social mapping. You probably are using analytics as well. We think that's a big part of the resolution here.